And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Jane Thompson, who had a profound near-death experience in 2008. While she was on the other side, she learned many lessons about healing, our soul's purpose, and ultimately how to live a fuller life. Jane, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're happy to have you. And Jane, if you don't mind, let's start on the day that this all happened and go from there.
Sure. My NDE was on August 22nd, 2008. I was in the emergency room, and the night before, I hadn't been feeling well. I was really tired and I was having a lot of low back pain, and I wasn't sure what was going on, but it was painful to the point where I thought, I'm going to call the doctor when I wake up tomorrow morning and just see if I can get in to see if everything's okay or what's going on. And little did I know what was waiting for me the next morning. Uh, right as the sun was starting to come up, I woke up and I was in the worst pain that I've ever been in my entire life. It's the type of pain that you get when you have the flu. You have those all over body aches. It was like that, but much, much worse to the point where I couldn't even move my body. And I was burning up. I was so hot that I was sweating. And we found out later that I had a temperature of 106 degrees. So I woke up really early that morning, excruciating pain, and I had the blankets on my bed on top of me, and I knew that I needed to take those off so I could cool off, but I was in so much pain that I couldn't move my body. And so I just laid there. I was in and out of awareness. And I know that a certain amount of time had passed because every time I would wake up, my bedroom was getting lighter and lighter. The sun was coming up more and more. And I was finally able to reach for my cell phone, which was on my bedside table. And I called a family member and I said, something's wrong. I really need to get to a doctor. I'm in horrible pain and I think I have a really high fever. So she said, let me get dressed. I'll come over and I'll take you in. And she told her husband what was happening when we hung up the phone. And he said, it's not like Jane to be up this early in the morning and calling and asking for help. Sounds like something bad's going on. And maybe this is more of an emergency room visit. And after I hung up the phone with her, I completely blacked out. I don't remember anything until she got to the house to pick me up. And we did go straight to the emergency room. I The pain was getting worse and worse, and I was really losing strength the more time that was going on. And I was in a little curtained off area in the emergency room. They didn't know what was happening, but they came to get me for a CT scan. And I went in for that, and everything around me was so amplified. All of that sensory input, everything was so amplified. The lights felt a million times brighter than they were. Sounds seemed a million times louder than they actually were. And I was really getting a little irritable because of that. And I didn't have an IV in yet, but right before I went, before they slid me in through that tunnel for the CT scan, they were trying to insert an IV. And I was so dehydrated from that fever that they were really having a lot of trouble finding a vein. And it was at that point that I was wanting to completely fade out. I felt myself really trying to leave my body, but every time the nurse would jab me with the needle to try to get the IV going, it would pull me back into my body. So I was kind of abruptly in and then abruptly back out again. And I don't remember anything during the CT scan. The next thing I remember is after it was over, they took me back to an area in the emergency room where we were waiting for the results of the tests and waiting for the doctor to come in. And that's when everything really started happening, when I really started dying. I was so worn out and the pain was so unbearable at that point that I closed my eyes and I just completely cut out the external world. I completely disconnected from everything that was around me. And I was still very hot from the fever because they hadn't started treating me yet because they didn't know what to treat for. And I was also freezing cold at the same time. And I started convulsing and I could feel the veins in my body almost like they were just so stressed, they were ready to pop. And I felt so much pressure in my head, in my skull, that I felt like my head was just going to explode. I felt like I couldn't take any more of that pressure. And at that point, I had a thought. I was thinking to myself, I cannot take any more of this pain. I don't know how much more of this pain I can take. And it was right then that I lost all awareness from the external world. And I lost a lot of the awareness of the pain. I could still feel it, but it was turned down at this point. And I went very internal. And it was like I was going on a little journey through my body. And I was looking at everything. And it was almost one of those films that you would imagine seeing maybe when you were in health class, in high school or middle school, where you can see what the blood looks like when it's pumping and what role the cells are playing. I could see all of that. I could see my internal organs, and it was very factual. There was no emotion around it. It was just taking a look. And as I continued to look around internally, I could see everything was starting to change. It wasn't vibrant. The blood didn't seem to be as vibrant. The cells didn't seem to be as vibrant. And I noticed the shift happening. And that's when I had this awareness, or just really this knowing of, I'm dying. This is what a dying body looks like. And this is what it feels like to die. And again, I no emotion around it. I wasn't scared. It was just, this is what's happening. And right at that moment, I popped out of my body, and that little bit of pain that I still had was completely gone. And I found myself feeling myself on the ceiling of the hospital area that I was in the emergency room. And I was looking down at the scene below me. And I could see what I recognized as me lying there on the hospital gurney. And I saw a couple of people that were there with me, um, looking very confused. And the scene was quite chaotic with the medical personnel there as well. And I just saw my body there. And I was very confused at first because I thought, how can I feel myself up here, but I see me down there? And once I got a little oriented, I could look at my body and I could see that there was no life in it. I could see that it was just the shell of who I am. And that my essence, who I really am, is what was up on the ceiling looking down. And again, I didn't have emotion around it. I was just taking it all in, just really looking. And then I very slowly started floating upwards, and I was still looking down. So I was floating backwards and upwards very gently, very slowly. The scene below me started changing. It, it at first was me in the emergency room with the people around me. And then it started to be the walls of the hospital. Then it started to be the ceiling of the hospital. Yet I could still see these little balls of white light bouncing around in this scene below, kind of like seeing through the ceiling of the hospital. I could see these balls of white light bouncing around, and they were all connected by a really thin iridescent line of white light that looks exactly the way a spider web looks if you catch it just right in the sunlight. Really thin, very delicate like that. And at the time, I knew those were people, but I wasn't really processing exactly what that meant at that time. Looking back, I will say those are souls that I was seeing, and the way that we are all connected and how oneness is playing a role in all of our lives. And so I was just noticing, just observing, taking it all in, still very slowly floating up and backwards. And all of that started to become smaller and smaller. And then the next thing I knew, everything was black. It was like being in outer space, where there was just nothing around me, which I now feel is what we would describe as the void, kind of that in between. And there was a little hint of feeling scared there, but I wasn't there long enough to really figure out what that was about. I just, now I look back and I think if I had been there longer, I don't know if that would have been a pleasant experience. But right at that moment, I was in a tunnel. And the tunnel was very black, but not scary. The tunnel was really an exciting and exhilarating experience. I was traveling very, very fast. And it was exciting with that anticipatory of, oh, I wonder what's next. It felt so nice to be in that tunnel. And then right then, I plopped out of the tunnel, almost like when you see kids at a slide at the park where they get down to the bottom and then just boop, they just pop right out. That's how I popped out of the tunnel. And immediately I saw and felt this brilliant, bright, white light. And because I had come from that black tunnel into this white light, it took me a moment to adjust to that. And as soon as I did, I could feel that light all around me. I started to feel it becoming a part of me. And I immediately felt love. And not just love in general, love for me. And it was unconditional love. And I felt very seen. I felt like everything I had been through in my life, anything I had done in my life, whether it was, kind or unkind, it was all seen, and I knew I was still loved. And there is nothing more powerful than feeling fully seen and fully loved at the same time. That was very healing. And so I was just soaking it up. I was just taking it all in and loving every second of it. And the next thing I felt was really an overwhelming sense of peace. Um, a feeling of all is well, everything is okay, everything is happening as it should, when it should. And it was such a clear knowing and such a clear sense of peace that there wasn't even the need to question it. It was just, oh, yeah, it just made sense that all was well. And right at that time, I was directed to look at my soul space, I guess you could call it, where I was a part of this white light. I am the white light. I felt that. And I also had my unique personality or vibration within that light. And I started noticing these really holes in my energetic space, in my soul space that it was all wounding. It was emotional wounding, um, trauma wounding. And I was noticing that the white light was filling in all these holes and healing those spaces. And I was becoming whole and I was becoming complete. And it felt so good. I can even feel the feeling right now. It was the most, it just felt whole. There really isn't the right vocabulary to describe why that felt so good. It was just that feeling of being complete, fully loved, fully healed. And I started to notice then what I think were other souls starting to approach or to come into the scene. But I didn't really have enough time to figure out what that was or to let that unfold because right at that moment, I heard this inaudible voice say, "You need to go back," which is not what I wanted to hear. I mean, that was ecstasy. That was pure bliss, what I was feeling and experiencing. And I did not want to leave that. So I resisted and I protested. I said, "No, I don't want to go back." And then I heard the voice again, "You need to go back." It was firm, but it was gentle. I knew that I wasn't going to um, talk my way out of this one. I knew that I was going to be going back. I still protested though. And I said, I don't want to go. Please let me stay. And then right at that moment, I felt myself go back into the tunnel very quickly, through the tunnel, back into the hospital, and then into my body, in through the top of my head. And it felt like I got sucked back into my body. And the pain returned just for a split second. And it was just enough for me to know, okay, I'm back. I'm back in my body. I'm back in this world. And then I don't remember anything until much, much later that night when I was in pre op getting ready for my first surgery.
What was the medical condition that you had?
I didn't find out until the very next morning that I had a kidney stone that had become lodged in my ureter. So it was stuck in my ureter and it was blocking all of the toxins that the kidney typically filters out. It was stopping all that from going out, and it was all going back into my body, into my bloodstream. And so my entire blood supply had become infected, a bacterial infection, and my internal organs were also being affected by that. I had gone into septic shock, is what had happened.
Hmm, that makes sense. Whose voice do you think that was that told you you had to go back?
That's a good question because I get so stuck on the getting, trying to figure out the vocabulary when it comes to talking about my NDE and everything around it. The best answer that I can come up with for that question is it was God. And um source. It's where we all originate from, where we all came from. And it wasn't authoritative in any way, although I know it could sound that way, but it was just more like a wise person in your life saying, "I see you coming down this path, but you're not quite done over there yet." And so it wasn't God in a sense of this. It was God in a sense of source, where we all originated.
So, did Source indicate to you why you had to come back? Like you had a purpose or you weren't finished?
I did not know a reason then. I I know more of the reasoning now, and I do see it continuing to unfold. Um, I think when we have NDEs, because we all are unique individuals and we all do have our own unique vibrations and ways about us, I think we get what we need when we're there. And my personality is such where if it had all been laid out for me, I would have missed out on the big part of the journey of being back in my body. And I think that's why it wasn't, the plan wasn't laid out. I would have taken it and run with it in a way where I would have missed out on a lot of what I needed to experience during figuring out what the purpose was of me coming back.
While you were over there, you saw these holes in your energy field get filled, and you experienced being whole again and healing. Once you were back on this side and you regained consciousness and you were back to life, was your life changed like you've been healed?
Yes and no. My life definitely changed forever because of that experience of being in the white light. My perspective changed, my perspective expanded. Um, Experiencing that type of love is something that you can't unexperience. When you feel loved that deeply, that will change you forever and for the better. Um, and so my life was completely different because of the beauty of my NDE and being in the light. And I still had my baggage with me. The traumas were still there waiting. And so, although my energetic space had been healed, as soon as I crossed back over through the veil, it was like all that stuff started coming back. And I think because we live in bodies that are dense, and the physical world is quite dense, and gravity, and um, to live in a way here where I would have been completely healed the way I was on the other side, I don't even know if that's possible when you look at it from kind of a quantum physics perspective of it. I just think the weight of everything that we deal with keeps the trauma still here, where when we do cross back over, it's like there's our baggage still waiting for us to pick up and work with. The good thing about the experience that I had during my NDE was then I knew how to work with it. And the goal for me has always been, how can I get as close to complete or as healed as possible in this physical world as I was when I was in the light? Because I've always been convinced there's got to be a way to get close to that. And that was really the big challenge and really a big part of the purpose of me being back, so I could work with that and figure a lot of that out. So, to answer your question, my life was completely different, and I had a lot of the same problems at the same time.
Well, did you figure it out? And what I mean by that is, can you have the NDE without the death experience?
I think it is possible to get very close to that. Um, of all of the life that I've lived here on earth, nothing has come close to being in that light. Um, I would say the closest that I've come to that is when my daughter was born, and the love that I felt for her and the way she looked at me, because I had a child after my NDE. Um, Even that pales in comparison to the love and healing that you get from that love on the other side. So, yes, you can access the light because we are the light, all of us. We are the light. And so it is within us. We just have so much that clouds clouds it or gets in the way of us even recognizing that it's there. And ego's the big one, but we needed ego to survive early in life and the busyness of the world that we're in, all the mental chatter that we often engage in. And so it's right there for you. It's just getting quiet enough to access it. And it may be just little bits and pieces here and there, but we kind of have to take what we can get. And so, yes, we can access the light because we are the light. It's just a matter of going inward enough and disconnecting from the external world enough to be able to sense that.
So should we do that from meditation or what?
Meditation is great. Meditation doesn't work for everyone. It's any type of quieting practice, and it can change for you over time. Meditating, listening to music that doesn't have lyrics, especially if it's music that's tuned to healing. I will share that the closest that I've come to feeling the all of the feelings that I had during my NDE is when I am standing at the shore, I'm standing there on the beach and I look out at the ocean and you know as far as the eye can see, all you see is sky and water. And that is the vastness that you experience during an NDE. And so anything you can do to bring yourself to experience vastness, whether that's standing at the shore, looking out. It could be lying on the ground and looking up at the night sky, the stars in the night sky, lying on the ground and watching the clouds as they go by. Anything that makes you realize how big everything is without getting involved in the hustle and bustle of the world. So nature is very helpful in that way too. Um, but it's different for everyone, and you have to really play around with it. Spending time with pets can be very helpful if you're a animal person, because they are still very connected to that light. They don't have the ego stuff going on that we do. So yes, it is possible to experience it. It takes a little more work to get there, though.
I've been told by one near-death experience researcher that approximately 50 or 70% of marriages end up in divorce after the NDE. And you experienced a love on the other side that we can't compare or can't even, explain here. Do you think people who have had the NDE have unrealistic expectations from their partners afterwards?
I think that probably can happen. Um, I think more of what is happening with those really high percentages, I've even heard it's up to 80%, the divorce rate for people that have had NDEs is high. Um, I think it's more about it changes you so profoundly that it's very disruptive to a marriage or any type of partnership, to friendships, to family relationships. And that's what happened to me is I came back and I had this experience that I really needed to talk about in order to be able to process it. But I was kind of this hardcore businesswoman prior to my NDE. And then I came back all lovey and let's just hug and talk about love. And everybody's like, who is she? It didn't make any sense. And so I think it's the dissonance. You used to really jive with certain people that were in your life. And then all of a sudden you come back, you're vibrating differently. Your energy is completely different, your perspective has completely changed. Um, and it's still very fresh. So you're not really eloquent in talking about it. And also, the people may not even want to talk about it. And so I think it's more about you're just totally different and you don't even know who you are. because you haven't integrated the experience yet. And it's just that relationships kind of fizzle out, sadly, when there's such a big difference there. The people in my life that stuck around, um, they're some of the people that, I treasure the most because they were willing to let me go through whatever I needed to go through after my NDE. And whether they believed my story or not, or whether they understood what was happening or not, they were still there for me. And they held space for me while I went through all of that. And those are some of the most precious relationships that I have. And that's not to say that the people that I drifted away from or that, the relationships fell apart, that they're bad or I'm bad or they're good or I'm good. It's none of that. It's just people change when they have an NDE. And it's hard on the people that are in our lives to know what to do. It's foreign territory. And so it can create a lot of tension.
Why do you think NDE videos like what we're making now are so addictive?
It's they're totally addictive. And I say it's a great addiction to have. My take on what's happening is particularly for the people that were really fortunate enough to go into the white light. When we are talking about the light, we're feeling it. And we are experiencing it again. And as we experience it, you can feel it too. And so when you're hearing about the light, when you're hearing about an NDE, you're kind of coming along on this journey with us and you're experiencing the white light right along with us because it's not words. And NDE has nothing to do with words. NDE has everything to do with feeling and the energy of it. And when I first started talking about my NDE, I would stumble all over my words. I could not get the vocabulary. And I remember talking to this one woman who really encouraged me to talk about my NDE because she loved them. And after I was done talking, I said, "Oh, I really messed that whole thing up. I didn't even do it justice." And she touched me on the arm and she said, "No, Jane." She said, "I saw it in your eyes." And that's when I realized talking about the NDE has nothing to do with talking with the words. People just want to feel it. And that's why it's addictive because you feel the love, you feel the peace, you kind of get a taste of it.
After your NDE, did you notice that you had any new abilities that you didn't have prior that could be considered psychic?
I was very sensitive immediately after my NDE. And I was not an empath. I didn't even slightly resemble an empath before my NDE. But a little bit that evening in pre-op, I remember feeling what the people were feeling around me, but I was not really with it enough to really understand what all that meant. But it really started the next morning where I could sense what strangers were even feeling or picking up on thoughts. And it was a very surreal experience because I didn't know if it was the pain medication that I was on. It really felt trippy, was what it felt like, because it was so brand new for me to feel or to be that sensitive. And that needed some time to unfold because I really did blame a lot of it on pain medication for a while. And I had surgeries that followed and a pretty long recovery time. And so I started having kind of these trippy experiences, picking up on what other people were thinking or feeling. But I blamed it on the pain medication. And I thought, as soon as, you know, I'm I'm healthy and everything's good, this will just go away. But what happened was, as soon as I was off the pain medication, I became more and more sensitive. And I had a really hard time going out into public. Um, Grocery stores were very difficult for me because they tend to be a little more busy and you have a variety of people there. I was just picking up on everything, and I didn't know if I was making it up. I didn't know how accurate the thoughts were that I was picking up on or the feelings were. And then the more I started socializing more after my NDE, I started having these weird disconnections and conversations where it was almost like my reality was a little different than my friend's reality, where I knew things that she hadn't. I'm thinking in one specific situation where I was out to eat with a friend of mine, and I knew things that she hadn't told me yet, but I didn't realize she hadn't told me yet until I started talking about it. And she was just kind of like, "How do you know that? What are you talking about?" And I really felt the disconnect. And the way my clients, especially, but also friends and people in my personal life, describe it now is they say, "Jane, you're like 10 miles up the road from everyone else. You just kind of know things and you see things and you kind of cut through the ego part of stuff, part of life and interactions." And yeah, they say it's just like you're 10 miles up the road from everyone else. And I can deal with it a lot better now, because I have better boundaries around it. And, people need to have their journey. So I may be over here with a knowing, and they may be here. And if they want my help to get up here, I'll certainly help. But they may want to be here, and you just kind of have to let them. And so it took me a while to sort through all of that.
During your experience, was anything revealed to you by either beings or source?
I would say the healing and becoming whole was the main thing that was revealed to me or shown to me, but it wasn't like a spoken sentence of this is what it is. It was the difference between when somebody does something for you or when they just show you how to do something. And so it was showing me this is what happens when we have trauma. We get these holes. We lose parts of our essence. We There's vacancies in the energetic space, in the soul space when that wounding takes place. And here's what you do to fill it back in. So that was the big thing that was revealed to me. Um, and I now understand better that whatever was needing to be revealed or whatever was really needing to be taught, whatever I really needed to learn, it was that kind of grabbing my attention, going, "Jane, look at this. Like, look at these holes. Look at these white lights bouncing around." But it wasn't a formula that was laid out.
Has the memories of your NDE faded over time?
The memory of it, no. The feeling of it, definitely not. Um, the connection to it, I've noticed I can fade out of a little more frequently. In fact, I was doing a healing this morning. I had a client this morning, and I told her, I think I finally understand why people who have had NDEs often have more than one. And it's after a certain amount of time goes by. I was washing dishes the other night having this thought, which washing dishes is very meditative for me. So I really can get into that zone. But I had the thought of, I feel like I need a refresher or something, but I don't want another NDE. I'd rather find other ways to refresh the memory. But I mean, for me, it's been a while now. And to stay actively connected to the memory and the feeling of it, it does take some effort and some intention to really go back. And I always get that reminder on August 22nd, every year, the anniversary of my NDE. I try to make some time for myself where I can just sit and recall. And it's not hard for me to profoundly reconnect with it in a way as if it happened 10 minutes ago. It just does take a little more effort, and I have to remind myself of don't forget, don't forget. Go back and visit. Go back and feel the light again. Go back and get another healing because every time I remember it, I am going back into the light and I'm getting another healing. And I think that's why a lot of people that have had near death experiences, we're on this constant journey of healing and changing and transformation because we do go revisit all the time. It's always on the forefront, always. Not a day goes by when I don't think of it. But to really connect with it, I really have to set some time aside to do that.
Were you shown anything during your experience about why we suffer so much while we're here?
Well, I think that's really the million-dollar question of why does that happen? And especially when we look at children that are suffering, animals that are suffering, the most innocent sentient beings that there are suffering. And the answer is we don't know why. And the reason we don't know why is because we are not looking at a complete picture. When we are in our bodies, when we have brains that we're dealing with, when we have egos that we're dealing with, um, our perspective really lessens dramatically, significantly. And so when I was in the light during my NDE, all of that was stripped away. And so I had that 360-degree perspective. And that's when I knew that even though things were happening that seemed or were, are suffering or evil, even, um, all is well still in some way. And it made perfect sense to me when I had that 360-degree perspective. But now that I'm back here, I still know that all is well. But I also, look at the news and see what's going on in the world or look at the way my neighbor's treating someone. I see that there's suffering and there's really some cruel stuff going on. And I don't really try to make sense of it because I know that I would be using logic to do that. And you can't turn something that's illogical into something you can't use logic to make something illogical logical. And also I know that I don't have a complete picture, so we really couldn't even begin to understand why they're suffering. The peace that I have is knowing that when it's my time to go back into the light and it's everyone's time to go back into the light, then we will understand.
Do you think that you did understand it on the other side? It's just that you were unable to bring that back with you?
I think that's a great question. I think that simply by being in the light and being away from the limitations of all of this, I just understood. But because when you're out of your body and in the light, the need to control completely disappears. And so it's like you can still have all the questions when you're in your body, but then when you go out of your body, you no longer have the questions, but the answers are still there. if that makes any sense at all. Everything we need to know is in the light, but once you get stripped of all of this, you just know, so you don't need to ask.
What about your experience inspires you?
Love and healing, I would say. Um, Heart healing in particular. To know that we are that light that was in tells me that we are capable of giving that kind of love. Maybe not as profoundly as when you're on the other side, but we are capable of giving that type of love. But there's so much that has hurt us. There are so many ways that we've been hurt that prevent us from giving that love and prevent us from receiving love. So the love motivates me to look at the areas where I've been hurt that prevents me from giving and prevents me from receiving. That's the healing portion of it. And then also helping others with their healing. So hopefully they can get closer to having that open heart where they can get as close to pure love as possible. So healing, learning, evolving, it's what we're here to do. And if I really had to water it down, I would say whatever gets in the way of love, that's what we need to look at. That's where our healing is needed.
I think what you're saying is that even though we have an identity on the other side, we still are the light.
Yes. We are, that's where we came from. It's who all of us are. And it's what's at our core. We are that love and that peace. Um, but we're also human. We're having this human experience, and um, humans aren't always kind to one another. And we're here to heal all, as much of that as we can, as much as we're ready to. And I tell people, don't go digging trauma up. Don't go digging pain up that needs to be healed. It will show up for you when it's time for you to see it, when you're ready to see it, and just allow it to unfold. Um, because we can overwhelm ourselves with that healing journey because we do want to get closer to that love and that light. And so we can kind of want to speed things up or put the pedal to the metal on healing, but that's not how healing works. And so just allowing yourself really to be in flow as much as you can while you're having this human experience, because that makes it a lot more tolerable to not be forcing things all the time.
If you had a friend that was suffering over the loss of a loved one, what kind of advice would you give?
Well, I think it's different for each person. I think the most important thing that we can do for someone that has lost someone that they love is to hold that space for them. I think sometimes we want to fill the space up with words, and sometimes when you're talking about something as delicate as the loss of a loved one and grief, um, sometimes if we worry about too much about the words we're saying, that's when we start using intellect to try to help what is really a very spiritual topic. So I would sit and I would listen and I would hold space. And what I mean by holding space is kind of being like the calm, centered one in the room. It's like if you need to fall apart, I'm going to be strong for you and you can lean on me. Um, and then when the time felt right that they were ready for me to speak, I think one of the most profound things to remind people of is all we've really lost is the physical connection, which we are in the physical world. So we really treasure the physical connection. Touch is important, and to look in someone's eyes is important, and to hear a voice is important. And that is something to grieve when we lose the physical connection. That's the only thing we've lost, though. The soul connection is still there. We are always connected to people that we love and that love us by the energy of love and by that energy of oneness. And that never goes away. And in fact, sometimes it can be comforting for people that had difficult relationships with someone that has passed. Sometimes I'll even say to them, now maybe you have a chance to have a really loving relationship with that person because all that ego stuff is gone and it's almost like it becomes water under the bridge. And maybe it's a chance to heal the relationship that you had with that person on earth.
After watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
I've got, they can go to my website, which is safehandshealing.com. I've tried to cover a lot of the big themes that come up around NDEs, particularly around healing. I've tried to cover a lot of the bases there. So there's a lot of information there. Um, but you know, Jeff, when I first came back from my NDE, I was a mess. I did not understand what happened. I didn't know what to do with what happened. And so a big part of my purpose and journey of coming back is to create ways for people to navigate after they've had a spiritual transformation or they're on any type of spiritual journey. So I've tried to put a lot of that on my website. And also, I'm available. I do group healings the first day of each month. I do one-on-one healings, and I have a lot of workshops to help people navigate all of the topics that we're covering and that you cover on your podcast. And those all have guided healings that are actual healings that you can listen to every day if you want to. But my mission and my purpose now that it's been a while and I've had some time to watch all of that unfold, it's all about healing. So I'm just trying to bring healing and understanding to people of how they can heal, what that even means, and what that journey even looks like.
Well, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
I'm going to give you two.
All right.
The, you know, I say this a lot, but I think it's very profound and I think it's very reassuring. People need to know everything's going to be okay. Um, and it sounds almost like a simplified thing to say, but I think that's what we need to hear. And that's what the inner child that all of us has needs to hear that somehow, some way, everything is going to be fine. Everything is working out exactly as it should. And you are loved. You are deeply loved. You're deeply cared for. You are seen. You're valued. And um, life is a blip on the radar. We've got a whole eternity to experience that direct access to the light. And when it's our time, that's what we have to look forward to.
Jane, thank you for your message and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed being here, and I hope that this is helpful for people.
My pleasure. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.